It entirely depends on what the spring brings us, if we're going to end up with ice jams or with a nice easy ice out and no flooding issues at all.
We've been seeing the 100-year floods much more often than once every 100 years.
The raging waters of the Mohawk River had begun pouring into Schenectady's Stockade section.
It was indeed a day of maritime mayhem here on the Hudson. And most people realize it could have been a lot worse.
You didn't realize the water came up really that fast.
Everybody is in a flood zone, even if it's not a very severe one.
We're hoping for the best and preparing for the worst, right?
We're inching closer to spring, and many of us are hoping to see these temperatures warm up. But with that comes a dangerous threat: ice jams. We're here on the Mohawk River, and tonight we're taking a closer look at these events, how they happen, where they're most likely to occur, and why they can be such a threat. I'm joined by the First Warning Weather Team and several special guests to tell you what you need to know about ice on the move. Ice on the Move, the threat of ice jams, sponsored by Landscape Inc. So what is an ice jam? First Warning meteorologist Christina Talamo explains.
Ice jams are most common during the late winter and early spring months when warmer temperatures and heavy rain cause ice on top of rivers to melt and break up, leaving chunks of ice to flow downstream in the river. As these chunks of ice flow down the river, they can get stuck in tight areas or when the river curves, allowing the ice to build up, blocking the natural flow of the river. This leads to sudden flooding out of the river and into surrounding neighborhoods. Temperatures this time of the year can also drop back below freezing overnight, allowing water on the roads from flooding to freeze, creating dangerous driving conditions.
We just heard from Christina that in order for ice jams to occur, you need warm temperatures, rainfall, and rapid runoff to move the ice. Meteorologist Reed Kisselbeck sat down with the National Weather Service in Albany to see how exactly they forecast ice jam probability.
It entirely depends on what the spring brings us, if we're going to end up with ice jams or with a nice easy ice out and no flooding issues at all. So we're hoping for the best and preparing for the worst, right?
The National Weather Service is always watching our forecast river levels and how thick the ice is. In order for ice jams to become an issue, we would need some sort of floodwaters to raise the river ice up and break it apart. Another factor in wintertime that can contribute to flooding is snowmelt. While it was more common in the past, in some instances the Weather Service has to go out and get snow core samples themselves. But what exactly does a snow core measure? We went out with the Weather Service in Scotia to see some of the gear used to get a snow core sample.
So this is equipment for measuring a snow water equivalent?
The snow water equivalent is how much water is in the snow if you were to melt it. Some years in late January, February, or even March, the mountains in our region can have a lot of water in the snowpack. 10 to 15 inches of water equivalent is not unusual after a cold or snowy winter. These tubes can be as tall as 5 feet and have teeth on the bottom to grind through some dense snow or frozen icy snow.
Once you get the tube full of snow, we have a scale which we can weigh the tube and the snow together. And water has the same weight whether it's liquid or frozen.
You can even do this in your own backyard if you wanted to.
This is like a standard backyard rain gauge, it's a 4-inch rain gauge. And the way you would do it is, it's very simple to do it. You just stick this into an undisturbed area of snow, try and clear the snow away from the gauge, and then the hardest part is getting something underneath, a spatula, a clipboard in this case, and then flipping it over. And then your snow is in the bottom of the tube. The next step is to take that indoors and to melt it. And then you pour this into the inner tube and you can get the liquid equivalent of the snow.
The National Weather Service also has a variety of partners that are, as a part of their operations, required to make snow core measurements and figure out how much water is in the snow.
We rely on those partners to provide us with that data, and that all gets fed into our forecast models to figure out how high the rivers are going to get.
From the National Weather Service in Albany, I'm meteorologist Reed Kisselbeck.
Some bodies of water are more prone to ice jams forming than others. Rivers with sharp bends, shallow areas, and debris-filled riverbeds are most vulnerable to these events. Christina Talamo takes us through which parts of the capital region are most at risk.
Let's start along the Hudson River. Ice jam prone areas are typically areas that have sharp bends in the river or man-made obstacles like bridges, piers, and dams to block the flow of water. The Hudson River can lead to issues near Troy and Albany and areas further on south. Heading north along the Hudson between Waterford and Fort Edward, ice jams can occur as ice forms on the ponds behind the hydroelectric dams at Stillwater and Mechanicville. Heading even further north, the upper part of the Hudson River is prone to ice jams, specifically between North Creek and Hadley, especially at the Glen where Route 28 crosses the river, Cronin Golf Course in Warrensburg, and just above Hadley Falls. Now heading over to the Mohawk River. The Mohawk River often leads to ice jams at Tribes Hill, just upstream of Lock 12, where the Mohawk River meets the Schoharie Creek. Then moving eastward, most of the ice jam concerns along the Mohawk River occur in Schenectady. The river widens by the Western Gateway Bridge, but narrows downstream by the Railroad Bridge. The Railroad Bridge has multiple piers in the water and can be an obstacle for ice moving downstream. Between these bridges is the unprotected Stockade neighborhood that floods easily during ice jams. Heading further east along the Mohawk near the Crescent Dam and west towards Vischer Ferry, the river narrows near Half Moon and the Twin Bridges. Here, ice can jam quickly and flood the nearby neighborhood.
You heard Christina mention the Stockade Historic District in Schenectady. It's a place News Channel 13 has covered many times over the years as ice jam flooding has ravaged homes and businesses. Flooding and ice jams on the Mohawk River have been recorded since the settlement here in the mid-1600s. About 80% of the most severe flood events on the lower Mohawk have been associated with ice jamming. First Warning meteorologist Juanique Martinez visited with the Stockade Association to take a look back at years of dealing with ice jams.
The Stockade District is as beautiful as it is historic. The existence of this neighborhood spans centuries and is the state of New York's first historic district. The notable community also has the unfortunate history of being flood-prone. Ice jams are a reoccurring issue with the ebbs and flows of weather patterns. Due to the low-lying nature of the Stockade Historic District, unfortunately, ice jams are unavoidable. Other communities along the Mohawk River are also affected by ice jamming. But the Stockade has the largest concentration of homes at risk.
It sits on that part of the Mohawk River that has a unique hazard, and that unique hazard is that the Mohawk is trying to go through a really narrow gorge that's then past that is the Vischer Ferry Dam.
The Vischer Ferry Dam plays a significant role in causing ice jams by stopping the river and causing water to back up. Over the years, there have been a variety of methods used to lessen the influence of ice jamming to communities, including the use of dynamite. Ice breaking has proved to be one of the best solutions and reduces the impact of chronic ice jam points. But it does not eliminate ice jams completely, so there are other preventative measures that can still be done.
The early warning system still needs to be done. That's not out there, and the people who live in the Stockade need an efficient way, or emergency managers, need an efficient way to communicate with those people about when the hazard occurs.
No matter the long-term plan, it's important that the historic integrity of the Stockade District remains intact.
Ice is especially tricky because it can cause so much damage, and there are so few solutions in terms of how to prevent it or prevent the damage. One of the things I think is unique about the Stockade is that it's a historic district, and so the solutions that might be available have to be weighed against the historic preservation of the community and the character of the neighborhood.
Reporting for News Channel 13, I'm meteorologist Juanique Martinez.
You can even monitor the risk of ice jams yourself. The United States Geological Survey hosts an interactive portal for monitoring ice conditions on the Mohawk River. There are a number of cameras set up at 6 locations along the river. You can monitor ice conditions during a certain time period or even in real time. The website also contains recent and current forecast data from the New York State Mesonet and the National Weather Service. If you want to check it out, we've posted a link to our website, WNYT.com. Still to come, Caitlin Erla spoke to a local insurance agency about why you may want to invest in flood insurance. A 2-foot snowpack and frigid temperatures in the beginning of January 1996 was followed by a short but intense rainfall of 2 to 4 inches on the 19th as temperatures soared to 60 degrees. A very rapid snowmelt resulted in widespread flooding. The flooding was compounded by ice movement and jamming in many rivers and streams, particularly the Schoharie Creek. The floods were described as a flash flood for main stem rivers due to the unprecedented rates of rise recorded during this event. Record flooding occurred on the Schoharie Creek and significant floods on the Mohawk River at Schenectady and the Hudson at Albany. Homes that are in high-risk flood areas are required to have flood insurance. And here in the capital region, those areas are few and far between, so many homeowners go without. But as Caitlin Erla is here to explain, just because your home isn't in a high-risk area, that doesn't mean your home is not at risk.
Everybody is in a flood zone, even if it's not a very severe one.
Andrew Pope with Brickhouse Insurance Agency says most people don't have flood insurance unless their bank requires them to.
The highest risk flood areas, like the Stockade district in Schenectady, the bank providing a mortgage would require the homeowner to have flood insurance. But just because you don't live in one of those zones doesn't mean your home can't flood.
There are different flood zones based on elevations and proximity to rivers and lakes. Pope says a bank will require flood insurance if a home has a greater than 1% likelihood of flooding in any given year. They call it the 100-year flood plan. But Pope says things have changed over the past few decades.
We've been seeing the 100-year floods much more often than once every 100 years. Over the last 20 years, it's become very, very prevalent since they started mapping it in the 80s.
Unfortunately, that has made his job more difficult.
We see more claims. The National Flood Insurance Program recently, within the last couple of years, revamped the way that they do everything because they had set up their program back in the 80s and things are just now out of date. They have to change it with the changing times.
He says most of the time after a homeowner is flooded, they think they're okay because they have homeowners insurance.
They oftentimes find out when it's too late. We see it often right around the time the snow starts to melt and the water comes in and the sewers get backed up outside and cause the streets to flood and floods into the basement and sometimes the first floor of people's houses.
In the historic Stockade neighborhood on the Mohawk River, there have been flooding concerns for years.
2018, it flooded really bad.
But there are other areas prone to flooding that some people may not realize.
We've seen smaller floods that aren't hitting as many houses in Schenectady, in Albany, in Troy, just one block down from your station here on Broadway is a flood zone all the way from Albany to Cohoes.
He says one of the hardest parts of his job is not being able to help homeowners after a devastating loss.
It's extremely difficult and disappointing and sad when you have a conversation with someone and you have to explain to them that, in fact, what's going on is not covered. I'd much rather have the conversations where I can be happy and say, don't worry, it's covered.
Pope says 95% of homeowners do not carry flood insurance.
And what are your thoughts on that?
I think that you should know where you are in the flood zones and the flood maps because you may not be required to carry flood insurance, but your next door neighbor may be, and the flood could just get a little bit bigger and hit you.
Caitlin Erla, News Channel 13.
These ice jams mainly have us worried about homes and areas flooding, but what about when the ice picks up something else along its path? This is what we saw in 2019. We'll have the story when we come back. Frigid temperatures over a 2-week period from late December 2017 into early January 2018 very quickly formed thick ice on rivers across the capital region. On January 12th, temperatures soared into the 60s, and along with heavy rain, river rises broke up the ice and caused ice jams in many locations. A dozen separate jams were reported, with numerous road closures reported due to ice jam flooding on smaller creeks and streams. The ice jam on the Mohawk River was the biggest ice jam seen in decades. Additional ice jams occurred on the Hudson River between Warrensburg and the Glen, as well as on the Hoosick River near Buskirk. As the floodwaters began to recede, a strong cold front passed through the area with temperatures dropping to 0, freezing many of the ice jams and their associated floodwaters in place. January 19th and 20th brought heavy snowfall over much of New York State and western New England. Then a strong low-pressure system ushered in an unseasonably warm and moist air mass on the 24th. Temperatures surged into the 40s to mid-50s. Steady rainfall during much of that day, combined with the mild temperatures melting some of the snow, resulted in flooding and ice breaking apart. And this flooding led to one of the more memorable incidents on the Hudson River in recent years. Let's take a look back at Dan Levy's report from 2019.
It was indeed a day of maritime mayhem here on the Hudson, and most people realize it could have been a lot worse. It was a river misadventure that not even Huck Finn could imagine.
In the very early hours of the morning, about 8 different floating barges broke loose.
Boats and barges and breakaway docks floating aimlessly and recklessly down the swift-moving Hudson, with bridges and other docks, not to mention freestanding ice flows along the treacherous path.
No easy maneuver. It was like watching some sort of a coordinated ballet out there with three different tugs at any given time, and pushing these barges up along the shore with some pretty treacherous conditions.
By mid-morning, the Rusty Anchor restaurant barge had been rounded up and tied up at the Port of Albany, along with smaller vessels that were pushed toward the shoreline. But the Captain JP's river escape was thwarted by the Livingston Avenue Amtrak bridge, where it remained wedged until late Friday afternoon.
It's crazy not because it happened, but because this is what nature can do, and a lot of people don't realize that.
Anthony Romero was among the many spectators who lined the shoreline to watch.
If there was people on it, it would have been way worse for sure. Glad I wasn't on it, honestly.
At the end of the hectic and heroic day, DEC Commissioner Sagos says there was no structural damage to the bridges and no environmental damage to the river.
I have never seen anything like this, where you have this many barges loose at the same time. I'm sure it's happened before, but this seemed like an extraordinary event.
Even though extreme changing weather patterns are the presumed culprit here today, it remains under investigation. At the Corning Preserve in Albany, with coverage you can trust, Dan Levy, News Channel 13.
Cleanup from that incident took nearly 2 months and cost the owner of the Captain JP thousands of dollars. Still ahead, we've shown you what can happen when these ice jams form, but what can we do to try to prevent them? Rachel Teedy will have that story.
There's stories of early 1900s where they tried to blow some stuff up with dynamite, and it was, we'll say, collateral damage. So that's not really something that I think most people are interested in doing. I think they may still do that in some very rural locations in the, Montana, but Schenectady, I don't really see them taking dynamite to those. There are places elsewhere in the Northeast where if they have effluent from sewage treatment plants that's kind of warmer, they will cycle that through the rivers to try to break it up a little bit. On very small creeks, I've seen people have some success with, believe it or not, fire hoses standing on bridges. But the general issue is if you move the ice, then whatever else happens is your fault, right?
On March 11, 2011, the combination of the heavy rain and runoff from snowmelt due to mild temperatures caused flooding of rivers, streams, creeks, roads, and some low-lying areas. An ice jam formed on the Mohawk River, which resulted in flooding along the river in parts of Albany, Saratoga, and Schenectady counties. The combination of increased flow from the upper Mohawk Basin and out of the Schoharie Creek caused ice to move, and an ice jam in place in Schenectady County at Lock 9 and Lock 8 broke up and moved downstream. Another ice jam formed and extended from the Twin Bridges back toward Lock 7 in Niskayuna and caused flooding of some properties and houses along the river.
I love it.
Record flooding occurred on the Hudson River at North Creek as a result of an ice jam near the Route 28N bridge, prompting the evacuation of some residents and the closure of Old River Road.
You might have seen tugboats pushing through the ice, moving up and down the Hudson River or the Mohawk River.
Sometimes this is for a specific client that needs something moved up or down our waterways. Sometimes it's the Coast Guard. Other times it's for research and to prevent, as much as we can, ice jams from causing terrible flooding.
Like the little engine that could, the tugboat Margot chugs her way through sheets of ice on the Mohawk River, clearing a path with the hope that larger chunks of ice will move downriver and not get stuck.
We're trying to stay ahead of it, and it's been working out, we think, so far.
Jeff Gritsavage is the Eastern Region Water Management Engineer for the New York State Canal Corporation. He explains how the Margot here is actually part of a pilot program to try and help stop ice jams before they happen. The Margot is reinforced with 3/4-inch steel, giving her that little extra oomph for breaking through the ice. This is the 5th winter of tugs breaking ice between Lock 7 in Niskayuna and Lock 8 in Rotterdam along the Mohawk River and Erie Canal. Shane Mahar is the Director of Public Engagement for the New York State Canal Corporation.
We proactively bring these tugboats to above Lock 7 at the end of October before the canal system closes for the season, and then we deploy them on a strategic basis throughout the winter months to break that sheet ice.
Mahar wants to emphasize this is just one tool in the toolbox. And despite this, ice jams can still form, especially with a winter like the one we're seeing right now.
This is not an average winter on this. Like last year, we only went out a few times. The boat's been going out like now we're getting to every other day. It had been twice a week, once a week, but you know, in order to stay ahead of it, you have to go out more frequently. This has been a harsh winter.
But a great winter to give a solid workout to the little tugboat Margot that could.
Mahar said through this process, they hope to learn about how to make the Mohawk River and Erie Canal more resilient against ice jams moving forward. Reporting for News Channel 13, I'm Rachel Teedy.
Our team is so grateful to have shared this special with you. Thank you for staying with us. And if you missed anything or want to watch it again, head to our website, WNYT.com. Our next special will take a look back at the Great Barrington Tornado, which touched down 30 years ago. Have a great night.